Lastly, it's important to know where you put your traits, what you call them. There's two different ways in which you can do that. The first method, which is used in the Legos application, is the visual functional approach, in which whenever we define a trait, we'll make a folder for it, either visual or functional. Visual meaning that it's something you see, it's an actual component that's being rendered. So the trait we've built is an example of a visual trait. So I'll put it inside the visual folder, delete the traits folder, we don't need it anymore, and then just change our trait path. So now fancy input is inside visual, but then for anything that's functional, we'll put it inside a functional folder. Functional would be just extra properties for components, or maybe just scripts or just flows. So let's make something called change background color. This will be a trait with just one script inside it. On mount now we'll have two traits, and the trait path is functional. Similarly, if you have a trait that you want to split up because the file has just become too big, or you've got some logic that you want to reuse, you can do the same thing. So for example, if we had a script over here, on mount set state, oops, got confused there for a moment, on mount set state key padding size. If we wanted to move this into a trait, just going to copy it. Then we'd make a new folder inside visual called functional. Set padding size. Can remove it now because we have the trait, and then instead now it's relative again inside the functional folder of where we are. Set padding size. And the same pattern you'd follow as you drill into traits. Traits can become very big because you might have a modal with toolbars and headers and content and multiple tabs. You can just keep drilling in and put the traits wherever they're being used. So because this initial trait has a functional trait, we make a functional folder, put the files in there. This one might have more files inside, or we might have visual folder inside this folder as well, and which we could just keep drilling deeper and deeper. It's important when you name your traits that from the name you can tell if it's visual or functional as well and what it does. So here we have our fancy input. That's a noun. We know it's something being rendered because it's something tangible. And this is a verb. We know it's doing something. Another way we could have done this instead is to have useful names for your traits and put them in folders instead. So we make a folder maybe called fancy input, put an index file inside it. This is my fancy input. Copy the set padding size trait. Just going to put it in there to illustrate this point. Now we're using from our own folder set padding size. And now what we have is the situation where everything is encapsulated into one folder. We don't have a folder for visual and a folder for functional. We have a folder for fancy input, which we just use like this, and the index file is the the main entry point. And now what we do when things become too big, for example, if the index file becomes too big because maybe the icon just becomes too large, we have too many scripts and flows inside this component, then what we would do is we'd make a new file in there called icon. Copy this one. And replace this with the traits. And just keep doing that until your file is small enough or maintainable enough. And then in some cases, when icon becomes too big, maybe icon also has functional traits. What we would do then is we make a new folder called icon, move this one into the icon folder. We can rename it to index, which is good practice. You don't have to. Inside the icon folder, we have index now. And then from there, we can do the same thing again by, for example, doing things like set icon value, if that was a functional trait being used, all inside this folder, and just keep repeating that. It's important to note that the method you choose will very likely be dictated by what's already been done on the project. It doesn't mean you can't change things, but when things are changed, it's a big effort that will have to be retested. So it's better to have a set way from the beginning and hopefully not change that down the line.